All right, we're almost done with this sub module. A couple small tweaks that I want to make to our app before we actually put it into production. This video, we're going to talk about the app delegate. Now, this is something that we don't really technically need in our app right now, but I think this is something that you will likely run into when you go and build your app and start using maybe other dependencies and doing other complex things that are not in this sample app. And the root of what we're going to talk about here is how do we get the app delegate into Swift UI? Now, I've seen lots of articles online about how to apply an app delegate in Swift UI, but I'm going to show you guys a solution that I've found that I haven't seen many people talking about yet that I think is probably the best bet for most apps. At the end of the video, you guys can leave feedback if you agree or disagree. So if we go back to the root of our app, it's the app delegate we're talking about here. We added this custom app delegate so that we could get the did finish launching because we needed to do that. Firebase told us to do that when we set up our dependencies way earlier in the course. Now we did it and we have our code here, but we haven't needed to actually run this with any of our Swift UI code. We don't actually start our Swift UI app until we get into here. So right now, this app delegate is actually outside of our Swift UI view. This is where the Swift UI view lifecycle starts. And so right now we didn't have a problem because we didn't need to do any Swift UI stuff here. But there's lots of other methods in the app delegate too, aside from did finish launching with options. So when you go and add some, especially some third-party dependencies, lots of times the docs for those dependencies will say use the app delegate, and they'll point to some of the other methods in the app delegate. So for example, in addition to did finish launching with options, there are other methods in here as well, which we are not using, like application did become active. So every time the app comes back to the foreground, it becomes active again. So you can tell if a user is coming back to your app. There also is will resign active. So if the application is going into the background, so the user is moving from active to inactive state. There's also a did enter background, or even application will terminate. These are some of the more popular ones. You guys can just Google app delegate methods. There's a ton of them. When we used to build UIKit apps, this was essentially the root of our application. There was always a massive app delegate implementation in our code base. And I think as Apple moved to Swift UI, they have slowly started to remove the requirements for the app delegate. And that's why when we build a Swift UI app now, we basically don't ever include an app delegate unless you need to, which occasionally we have to do something like this, pretty simple, did finish launching with options. But most Swift UI apps don't start with an app delegate and oftentimes never get one. But what we're talking about now is what is the situation where if we actually want to trigger some of these in our code base. So I can put them in this app delegate right here, but the problem is that this is outside of my entire application, right? We have the app view here and then the environment. And like, what if on maybe the app view, I want to maybe call in here, every time the app comes from the background to the foreground, in here, maybe I want to trigger check user status. So how would I get these delegate methods into my Swift UI app? That is the problem that we are facing right now. And the reason I want to address it as a general problem, not a specific use case, is because I think as you build your app over time, you'll find that these methods become more complex, and there's just always weird edge cases that you want to use these methods for. Now in Swift UI, there actually already is a implementation of this, and I will link an article below on how to use. There is something called a scene phase in Swift UI. So we can do @environment \scene phase. We can call this the scene phase. We'll take this value from the environment, it's just already in there, and we can go on change of, and we can add in the scene phase. This will be the old phase and the new phase. And here we can say switch on the new value. And we can get the three phases here, the active, the background, and the inactive state. Also is, I guess, default. So if a user moves the app from the background to the foreground, this should trigger. Or if they move it into the background or make it inactive, these would trigger. Now, this is supposed to work, and it probably does work most of the time. But I've built enough SwiftUI apps now to know that there are edge cases where these do not seem to be as stable as the app delegate methods. I know that the app delegate methods are going to trigger. This should trigger on change, but I've definitely run into cases where it's not triggering in the life cycle that I wanted it to. And maybe it's that I don't fully understand when this works. But regardless, I've found that I'd rather use the app delegate methods directly rather than using this. So I'm not going to tell you guys not to use this. This is easy. You can implement this on your own. But we're going to talk about an alternative solution that I have found to be with what most UI kit developers probably would prefer. So there's a little known trick in the application that I assume most Objective-C and UI kit developers know, but it's almost never talked about in SwiftUI anymore. And that is the notification center within the device. So when these trigger, there actually is a silent notification that triggers in the background of the entire application. And we can actually access that notification directly. So I'll pull up some of the Apple docs on this real quick. There's a notification center, and it's basically you can post a notification and then receive a notification. It's simple as you can listen for a notification to come through, and you can post a notification. And I think this was used more often in the early days of like Objective-C and UI kit to basically trigger notifications across different files in your app. So I just went here and Googled on ChatGPT, like what is the notification center? And so this is actually the code of how it works. You post a notification and there are built-in notifications, or you can create your own, and then you can listen for the notifications. Anybody who's built UI kit apps has probably seen this code and the Objective-C linker many times. So this would be used to add an observer onto maybe a button or a view controller. And when this notification triggers, this selector would trigger this function, which would then trigger the function down here. So basically you just add a listener and then you can post a notification. There's also remove observer, but we're not going to worry about that. So this is happening actually all the time in the background of our app for some default notifications like app did finish launching. Now we can also build out our own if we want to get hacky and create some custom notifications. But for now, let's just observe the default ones. So we can actually go into the app view here, and I'm going to listen. So in SwiftUI, we have on receive, so we can listen to anything that is a publisher. And we can actually convert the observers into publishers automatically. So in here, I'll call it the notification center .default.publisher for, and we can pass in the notification name. So here we can see a bunch of the default ones that are going to come through. So in here, you can put in your own custom notification name if you build a custom notification. If you're going to go do that, just ask ChatGPT, it'll build it instantly. But in the UI application, there also is a bunch of notifications here. So any of these we can just listen to in our SwiftUI app. So for example, application did become active notification. So anytime that our app delegate would have triggered did become active, that notification is actually triggering in the background of our app. So rather than getting the code here, we can just listen with a publisher and then perform an action in our SwiftUI code here. This will be the notification, which we are not going to use. And now we can do something. Now the caveat here is that this on receive needs to be connected. So I usually just use these at the root of my application, maybe on the tab bar, maybe at the app view at the beginning. If the user opens your app and you have on receive on maybe the chats view, if the chats view is not loaded, then obviously the on receive is not going to work. But this is also a great way, very easy way for whatever screen you're on, you can just trigger something every time the user comes back from the background to the foreground. My guess is this is not the approach that Apple wants us to do, and it's probably why Apple has not given this to us out of the box. But I find this to be much more reliable, much more useful in my apps. So now we can do something custom in our code. So for example, maybe every time the application will enter the foreground, so coming back to the front, then I want to also check the user status again. So just to triple check that they are always logged in every time they come back to the app. Just like that, we can now listen and trigger these notifications. Now, this is a lot of code, and I'm probably not going to remember to write all this every time. So let's make a reusable view modifier for this code here. Come up here and I'll right click, create a new empty file. Let's call this the any notification listener view modifier. In here, let's import Foundation and import SwiftUI. And go ahead and try to create a view modifier for this. So what we're going to do is listen to a publisher and we're going to pass in a name. So not this name specifically. And then we're going to perform an action, but not this action specifically. See if you can figure out how to do that without me. Pause the video here. If not, I'm going to jump in right now and we'll get going. Create a struct, and I'm going to call it any notification listener view modifier that conforms to view modifier. Every view modifier needs a body, so we'll return content as is, and we'll add our onReceive here. Now, when we do this publisher for, we can see that we need a notification.name. So up here, let's pass in a notification name of type notification.name. Now here, we don't want to call this, we just want to trigger some action. So in here, let's pass in a action. I'll call this on notification received, just to be a little bit more explicit than action. And it'll be a function that returns void. So let's call here on notification received. Here we'll pass in the name. Now, I almost never use this notification that comes back in the closure, but let's pass it back just in case. So this is of type notification center.publisher.output. I believe there's a type alias. I don't know where the docs are for it. We can just call it a notification. And then we can pass in the notification here. Lastly, let's just make sure that this is on the main actor because we're going to call it in a SwiftUI view. So now we can create an extension of view and create a function called on notification received. It's a function that returns some view. We'll call a modifier here with the any notification listener view modifier. Let's pass in the name. Let's call this name of type notification.name, as well as an action of type. This will be a function that returns void. It'll be a function that accepts a notification and runs on the main actor. Let's pass in our action here. Sorry, this should be name. I don't think that we need the main actor here, but it can't hurt to be explicit. Let's make this at escaping. And now we should be able to use this in our code. Let's jump back to the app view. So now let's call it .on notification received. Let's pass in our notification. And we'll use an underscore here because we don't need that. And now we'll call our action. So now this should be very easy for us to now go into any screen and manage basically any of these application methods we can now easily access in our code. And there's a ton here. Keyboard did hide, keyboard did show if the keyboard goes up or down. This is really incredibly useful. Most of these are really important for building an application. And if I ask ChatGPT, how do I create a custom notification? Now it's very easy. It's literally, you just extend the notification name, create your own custom name, just a custom string. And now we can post, so we can trigger the notification at any time. And then we can listen to it, not using this code, but using our code that we just set up. So this is a great way to basically, if you have a situation where your architecture is totally broken or you can't get something from one part of your code to another part, this is a very easy, fast hack that is generally probably anti-pattern and to be used in a very limited context. But it is a secret weapon that I think some of you guys will find pretty handy when you go out to build your own apps. We're going to wrap up this video actually listening to all of these notifications in our app. So below, I'm going to put a link to a link in my Swiftful UI package. So I have another package that we are not using in this app because I want to build everything ourselves in this app. But Swiftful UI is just a collection of UI components in Swift UI that you guys are more than welcome to use. But in here, there is a view called the root view. So what we're going to do, I will link it below. There's actually a file here that we're just going to copy and paste. So let's copy it, and then we'll look at the code after we copy it. Let's jump back into our app. In our reusable views, I'm just going to create a new empty file and I'll call it root view. And let's just paste in the root view that we just copy and pasted. So I have found that I end up using a bunch of these methods a lot, basically every time I build an app. And it gets really annoying to add like 5 of these at the root of my application every time. I have to remember how to do it. So all I did was package it up and then listen to some of the most common methods. So will enter foreground, did become active, resign active, did enter background, will terminate. The only method that we cannot get here is did finish launching. Because when we look at our app delegate, this did finish launching, right? This is where we're setting up our code. So clearly this has to happen before our app actually launches. So the only caveat using this method is that did finish launching will not work because it publishes and triggers before the SwiftUI app actually launches. But the rest of them do work. And so in this method here, I just have on first appear, which is I have a replacement for on first appear. So rather than did finish launching, we're going to use on first appear here, which is a little different, but relatively the same for the code that we want to trigger here. And then just actions for the rest of these as well. So now we can go into our app view. And what I usually just do is wrap my entire view, so the first view in my app, in a root view. And we'll pass in here a delegate and content. For the delegate, let's go ahead and create one in code right here. I will option enter. Let's triple click Control M. So now most of these, we don't have anything to do right now. So I'll just put nil, but this will be good to have if I do need it in the near future. For did enter foreground, we'll actually do this task here. So let's go ahead and open the brackets. This will be the notification in, and I'll call this. For the rest of these, I'll put nil. So it's not that I need to use these, but now I have access to them if I need to trigger something for any of these methods. And now in my content, I'll click enter, and then we'll just put our actual app, which is all of this stuff, inside the content block here. So it looks a little bit more confusing now, but this is going to unlock a lot for us if we need to actually use those delegate methods. Again, we didn't have to do it in this app, but I just wanted to show you guys how I would do it because I think that there's lots of apps where these become incredibly helpful. All right, now you guys know how to use the notifications. We built a custom view modifier for it, and we added a reusable root view that you can now put at the root of all of your apps. My final note would be that if you build your own app, you could also just import Swiftful UI so that you could just use the root view out of the box. Swiftful UI also includes the view modifiers. So any notification listen view modifier that we just made and the on first appear view modifier, I already have in this package. So I don't actually make some of these every time I build a new app. Anyway, let's jump back to our code. Let's option command C. Let's call this a feature and we'll say app delegate methods. Let's stage it. Let's commit it, push it up to GitHub, and I'll see everyone in the next video.